All right, almost on cue, the latest person to be welcomed by the Prime Minister was Li Qiang, the Prime Minister of China, just when we were talking about why Xi Jinping is missing. It's been said unequivocally by Indian ministers, Elizabeth Braw, that it's China's loss, if at all. Do you think that this was a calculated message that was being sent across by the Chinese president by studyingly staying away?
Well, who knows? And I think we're back to Kremlinology, the study of Soviet leaders that was so popular during the Cold War, when a global army of analysts tried to figure out what was going on in the Soviet leadership by viewing footage from afar. But I think the point here is that the world, the global public, doesn't feel that it can trust the messaging from the Chinese government. So if there is some sort of announcement regarding his absence, people will still, they won't believe whatever that statement is, and they will try to analyze for themselves why he is missing. And it can be anything from him having COVID to indeed him wanting to Prime Minister Modi. And this is, I think, a big challenge for the Chinese government, that the global public and indeed foreign governments feel they believe what comes out from Chinese authorities and indeed from Mr. Xi's office. And this is a huge challenge. Russia has the same challenge, if I may add, that whatever the Russian government says, the global public and indeed foreign governments tend not to believe.
You spoke, Mr. Kuhn, about how the next half of the century is going to be decided by the relations between India and China. But surely through aggression, through maps and on territory, this relationship is not being helped.
Well, if we look long term, you have the two largest populations on Earth, accounting for getting close to 3 billion people out of a total of 8. So India and China both have responsibilities to their own people and to the world. As we see the development in China over the last 40 years, particularly under Xi Jinping, where he has focused on the well-being of the people, what he calls common prosperity for the future. He wants the best for China. India wants the best for India. There are peripheral things we all focus on, naturally so. Borders come up. There's a lot of issues. But long term, I think we're on one planet together, and we have to deal with climate change. We have to deal with future pandemics and other issues that bring us closer together. So, in the modern world, knowledge is more important than rocks and pieces of land. But the human psyche, based upon our evolutionary background, continues to focus on territory. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully we'll all grow out of it.
Sushant, sorry, is it that easy to say that knowledge is more important than territory?
No, I think both are important. You can't say that one is more important than the other. I think that's a complete misreading of the situation. And in fact, Padmaja, go back 30, 40, 50 years, a lot of the stuff which was told to us that this is not important anymore, culture is not important anymore, your heritage is not important, your traditions are not important, because, everything is now becoming all mixed up together, and, your national identities are no longer important. Look at the world today. And clearly, yes, people must dream of, what John Lennon's song of Imagine. Yeah, all very well. It sounds really nice when you're hearing it on your iPod or iPhone or whatever. But that's not the reality. The reality is something very different. It could be what Mr. Kuhn is saying, and that is partly true, that there is an evolution taking place, and yet there are people who are stuck in the past. But the past has a very nasty habit of coming back and hurting people, right? So you can't ignore the past, but you cannot stop the future. And that is what I think under Xi Jinping's leadership, the Chinese are trying to do. I think the leadership before him, from Deng to Hu Jintao, was a far more visionary leadership, which was responsible for the rise of China and to some extent the peaceful rise of China.
Sorry to interrupt you, Sushant, but we've got these, the images of Joe Biden now being welcomed, being greeted by the Prime Minister. A lot is always said, Abhijit, about the body language. It's our favorite question on TV, of course. And, considering that just a month has passed since Prime Minister's state visit to the United States, a lot of warmth. People would have expected that you would not see, after the kind of relationship that Modi shared with Donald Trump, there would be blowback from the Democrats. That clearly has not happened.
You tell me something, Padmaja. Have you ever seen bad body language between Modi and any other world leader? It doesn't matter if it's the Prime Minister of some little semicolon in the Indian Ocean like Nauru or whatever, or some massive country like Russia. He's always this extremely effusive, warm person. Like, he went to Papua New Guinea on that same visit last month. And he was just so warm with the Papua New Guinea Prime Minister. I remember when Papua New Guinea opened its embassy in Delhi about 10 years back, people in Delhi in South Block didn't even know where Papua New Guinea was, and the Papua New Guinean ambassador got sent to the Africa section. But here is a man who's going there, who's hugging him like his long-lost younger brother or whatever. This man is extremely warm. Whatever...
And then saying, I'm going to be your voice.
And I'm going to be your voice. And I'm going to be your voice. And he's putting his money where his mouth is. Because, India is today at this is at this inflection point. We're no longer poor anymore. We don't count as those poor country stereotypes anymore. We're edging towards the better side of developing a nation. And there was a lot of worry that, India will forget where it came from in order to fit into the, the
club.
The low-born guy who then needs to fit in with the in-laws and then learn to eat with a fork and knife and things like that. By bringing the AU, the African Union in here, he's showing that part of his G20 presidency is not forgetting where I came from. What I said then I will do for you, I will do even today. Even though I'm not attending the G77 in Havana, that doesn't mean I've forgotten what I promised to you, what I intend to do. And I think that's fantastic, because we're actually, we went, unlike China, which uses a lot of country to jump ahead and then discards them when they're done. India does not do that.
So you're juggling a Papua New Guinea with a Saudi, with America, and all of them with the same effusiveness.
Exactly. No favor, no differentiation, bhed bhav, color, nothing.
And it's also important because, again, you see the same body language that we were talking about earlier, the warm hug, the laughter. It's almost as if, you're meeting old friends. Again, going to be very significant, Sushant Sareen, because if there is one other thing that is always spoken of about the Modi government, one is, of course, about democratic freedoms. Two is the treatment of minorities in India. And then back to back, you have him greeting Joe Biden and MBS.
MBS.
Look, I think MBS is truly a revolutionary leader. He is bringing about change. Both he and the ruling family in Dubai, they are bringing about, or the UAE rather, they are bringing about remarkable changes in the Middle East, and truly visionary and revolutionary changes. And I think if India, it was an area where India had very deep linkages, and yet at a political diplomatic level, we were virtually giving everybody else a walkover in this region. I think Mr. Modi's, one of his greatest diplomatic accomplishments has been reaching out to the Middle East, and just look at the kind of change which has come in the relationship between India and the Arab world in particular over the last 9 years. It's a sea change from what it was. I think it took us 30 years before a Prime Minister visited the UAE, which is such an important country for us in terms of diaspora, in terms of energy security, in terms of trade, in terms of financial matters. It's such a pivotal country, and yet you did not have a prime ministerial visit for decades. Even Nepal, it took you 20 years for a prime minister to visit Nepal, which is such a close country to us, culturally, civilizationally. And the Middle East, I think, with MBS coming in and bringing in the kind of changes he's bringing in, I think Saudi Arabia is a country which we must engage with very, very closely. And also, Padmaja, remember that at a time when the Islamic world is in a flux, there are two trends in the Islamic world. One is that trend of going back into the dark ages, the ISIS, Taliban kind of a trend. And the other is a trend which is being pushed forward by countries like the UAE, Oman, to some extent, and Saudi Arabia in particular. And I think it is the responsibility of all responsible countries in the world, including in the West, where, a lot of people diss MBS, to actually support what MBS, MBZ, and some of the other Arab leaders are trying to do. And if Mr. Modi is engaging with these people, I think it is something which is required for the betterment and for the security of this entire region and perhaps even the rest of the world. So that is extremely important. But I think it's also the kind of mileage which Modi gives to the Arab states, which actually disproves a lot of the nonsense propaganda which happens in this country. Now, there are people, who'll sit in India, journalists and others who'll say that, sitting in India, saying that we are not free to talk in India. These are people who write reams and reams of articles. I don't want to use the word starting with S, but let me use the word dissing India all the time in Indian newspapers, in international newspapers, and then saying that we don't have freedom to speak. We don't have freedom of speech and expression. It's kind of bizarre, but, I think this is what happens in a free country, that people can say whatever. In a free country, people are free to say that they are not free. And I think
let's be honest, people who are engaging with the Taliban and Muslim Brotherhood can hardly sit in judgment on India engaging with MBS of all people.
No names, but there was a certain high functionary of the US Parliament who was sitting at a function called the Indian something, funded entirely by the ISI. There's not one member of that who isn't directly linked to Pakistani intelligence. An intelligence organization that has supported ISIS, that has supported Al-Qaeda, that was actually footing the bills for Osama bin Laden's stay in Afghanistan.
We're talking about the lady.
About the lady. Is it, I don't know if it's proper to even assign gender. You'd never know. She's ultra woke. No. But the creature, let's just call it the creature. And what ended up happening was, without any sense of irony, talking about human rights violations in India, while this creature in question, her biggest funders are people like Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who incidentally is coming out here. But, I'm just sitting there watching the irony of all of this. And I realized what it's all about. This is basically an economic grift. It's writers and things like that who have zero relevance in real life. They want to go create this image that somehow, I am this brave, I am Bodhisattva, I am Rani Jhansi standing up for whatever, when in fact they're not. It's, that famous joke about how...
you're a political front for somebody's agenda.
They're a political front for agendas. They are a con job for fundraising and money raising. NGOs thrive on exaggerating problems, which is what these people do. And this is their bread and butter. There's nothing you can do about it.
What do you make, Elizabeth Braw, of India now sidestepping the traditional interlocutors with the Islamic world, as it were? Earlier you used to have the OIC, for example, where pretty much countries like Pakistan used to call the shots, and they used to decide how the Muslim world will engage with the rest of the globe. Now India has a direct engagement. We will go visit the Saudis, we will go visit Egypt, and these have been visits which have come after decades.
Yes, it's part of a major refashioning of the world order that is happening. We are at an inflection point, but all the groups and institutions and formats that were built up have been built up since the end of World War II, and in some cases a bit earlier. They are all, I'm not saying they've become irrelevant, but we are at the point where all of that hasn't prevented the geopolitical tension and worse that is taking place. And so the world is having to reconstitute itself, or the world's countries are having to reconstitute themselves in various groupings outside that system that has served us so well for many decades, but isn't serving us very well anymore. So I think what would happen is that we'll see these new formats pop up and countries team up in new groups that we haven't seen before. Maybe sometimes surprising groups, informal alliances, and I think that is not all bad. It may be an opportunity for countries to team up with countries that seemed like unlikely friends or allies decades ago, but maybe allies now.
I'm going to take a very quick break at this point. In just a few minutes from now, the first set of bilaterals is set to start. Before that, we will have the group photo. I'll also go across to my colleagues who are at the Bharat Mandapam to figure out what's the buzz over there, what's the activity. Back in a minute.